topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. Thanks for tuning in this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. If we have not met before and you don't know me, I am a workforce advisor, organizational psychologist, management consultant, logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Gusto now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by building a dynamic, high-performance culture and inspirational leadership activated by meaning and purpose. And did you know that inspired employees outperform their satisfied peers by a factor of 2.25 to 1. In other words, inspiration is good for the bottom line. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com or my personal site, elisecortez.com. Before we get into today's program, I am thrilled to announce that registration has been open for a fabulous new conference for women, for which I will serve as the MC. It's called Thrive in 25, and it's a jam-packed few days in Chicago, June 25th through the 28th of 2025. And it's designed to develop women as whole selves, from bolstering your mindset to your financial acumen to leadership to incorporating nature and art into your life to raise consciousness, and much more. Visit thriveit25.com for information and to register. Use my promo code of Gusto, all caps, to gain access to the free books and programs I'll be gifting registrants as well. Getting in today's program, we have with us Sebastien Page, the head of Global Multi-Asset and Chief Investment Officer at T. Rowe Price. He has more than 2 decades of leadership experience and has done extensive research on positive sports and personality psychology. He currently oversees a team of investment professionals actively managing over $500 billion in assets under management. He's written 2 finance books and appears regularly on CNBC and Bloomberg TV. We'll be talking about his latest book, The Psychology of Leadership: Timeless Principles to Improve Your Management of Individuals, Teams, and Yourself. We'll talk specifically about the principles discussed through the lens of positive psychology, sports psychology, and positive psychology. Sebastien joins us from Baltimore, Maryland. Sebastien, a hearty welcome to Working on Purpose.
Elise, thank you. I'm super excited. I love doing podcasts. You mentioned CNBC interviews. I think the podcasts are much more relaxed, much more fun.
I'm so glad. I'm delighted to have you here. And of course, I love your accent. Once upon a time, I could speak a little Francais. So I'm delighted to hear your accent as well. But let's celebrate this beautiful thing you brought into the world. Look at this gorgeous piece of work, The Psychology of Leadership. It's just beautiful, Sebastien. And as we were talking before we got on air, it takes a lot to create the book. And then once you write the whole entire book and everything, it's all published, you're like 30% done. Then then you got to promote the thing. So happy to have you on to talk about your work.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Very welcome. Well, let's just dispel the curiosity right out of the gate. I'm sure listeners and viewers are wondering, why did this finance money management executive write a book on self-improvement and leadership? Did something happen to you?
Elise, that question, I've gotten it from about 200 agents who rejected me to represent me for the book. Thankfully, I found a great agent and a great publisher. Look, I was struggling at work. I was stressed and I was beating myself up for being stressed. Mm-hmm. I had a high pressure job, but I kept thinking, I've been doing this for over 20 years. Why am I so stressed? So I started talking to a sports psychologist. And the first time I met him, he told me a story and it changed how I view psychology. He walks me through his best handball match ever. It turns out not only is he a PhD sports psychologist, he's also a pro athlete. He's won 40 national titles at the sport of handball. At least this is like squash, but you hit the ball with your hands. He
Wow.
has 40 national titles. His name is Dr. Daniel Zimmett. He starts telling me the story of his best match. It was 10 years ago. He remembers everything about it. He remembers where the ball was at every point in the match. It's emotional for him. At
Mhm.
some point, he recalls being on his knees and making an impossible shot. You remember the sounds, everything. And at least it's a complete letdown because he then goes, oh, yeah, I lost the other 2 points. And I go, wait, you lost the match? And he goes, yes. But to him, as a sports psychologist, it was irrelevant. What was most important to him was that he was playing a much stronger opponent. And that day on the court, he realized that he had improved his skills dramatically and that he was able to play at a different level. So just think about the mindset of someone who has 40 national titles, who's talking about their best match ever, and they happen to have lost the match, and it almost doesn't matter.
Mm.
At least this kicked off research in sports psychology and what it's about. And then I hired him as a consultant to help with the research. We went into positive psychology, which is about what makes people thrive in the long run. And then maybe the most fun, personality psychology.
Right.
And not just introversion, extroversion, other personality traits and how they drive some of our behaviors and how we interact with each other. The bottom line, at least, is it started with that conversation.
Mm.
It ended up with fascinating research. And I've just come to realize that business, leadership, self-improvement, there are a lot of findings in the research in those fields that have yet to be explored. And some of them are counterintuitive.
Hmm. Well, of course, as you might know about my background, I'm delighted to have a conversation with you as somebody who isn't necessarily immediately schooled in those topics, because my main education is in positive psychology and existential psychology. I then taught for many years various things like social psychology, personality psychology. So it's totally my jam. So it's delightful to see how you're getting so much value out of it and applying it into your own life and your own leadership. It's terrific.
And to me, at least, I just kept reading about it, learning about it, and thinking, wow, why don't more people know about this?
Right, right.
Serious research over decades. And for example, work Marty Seligman did on positive psychology and what types of long-term goals you should set for yourself to maximize your ability to thrive over time. It's just a gold mine. And we're all sitting here in business struggling with stress and setting goals as leaders. And we underestimate what people like you have done in research. And it's kind of in the drawer, and we have to look at this and use it.
I completely agree, and it works, by the way. So you brought up Marty Seligman. I certainly am a huge fan of Dr. Seligman, and you write, and some of the core stuff you draw on in your book is he calls his PERMA model. So let's just quickly treat that for our listeners and viewers, if you'll run through that for us.
I don't like acronyms. I'm a money management person. In finance, we have all these acronyms. And then you go into technology, we have all these acronyms.
Everywhere.
This one acronym, I love it. I use it in the book. I've devised chapters around it. PERMA stands for positive emotions, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, something you talk a lot about on your show, and accomplishment, but in the sense of long-term accomplishment. And what Seligman says is, every day we're all after positive emotions, and they're nice. You laugh, you get a like on social media, you get a good glass of wine. But unfortunately, some people aren't wired to experience positive emotion. It goes all the way to clinical depression. But IRMA is where the substance is. IRMA is where your ability to thrive long-term comes in. These are the things that feed your soul for the long run. I refer to positive emotions as sugar highs and Irma as the proteins for the soul. So you might think, what does this have to do with business and leadership? A lot, because guess what? A business is about relationships. There's a crisis of meaning in corporate America.
I
And
know.
I love your show, and I've listened to prior episodes, and it's so important to talk about meaning. I was at a town hall today talking about what we do in our business in retirement and the meaning of managing the money to give people better retirements. So all these things in positive psychology have huge applications in business. And at least it comes down to goals. As a leader, and you don't have to manage people to be a leader. You're a leader in your family, you're a leader in your church, you're a leader. You lead by example. As a leader, you're the one setting the goals. Because if you don't set the goals, who will?
Right. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about your book, Sebastien. There are many things, but I also really like how you turn some of these common ideas on their side and then you treat them differently. And I really, really, really love that. It's delightful. And so you do spend a third of your book is actually talking about setting long-term goals based on positive psychology. And you talk about, everyday life and all this, but can you say, but that you also then go on to say though, that it is said that measurable goals can become liabilities if they make leaders blind to ethics and burnout. So could you talk a little bit more about how leaders can balance goal setting with maintaining well-being and ethical standards?
This is super important. It's part of my own journey. Early in my career, I had what psychologists call goal-induced blindness. I was working nonstop, traveling nonstop. I was sleep deprived. I was stressed. And there's a story in the psychology of leadership. I almost died from a mysterious infection. I think because my body was completely run down. I made a full recovery, but that was full-on goal-induced blindness. When we talk about goal-induced blindness, we mean that you're so focused on your measurable goal, because it's usually a measurable goal, that you lose sight of other things that matter, like your health, in my case, or your sense of ethics. And those, companies will start cheating just to reach their goals. Volkswagen famously cheated on their emissions numbers.
Right.
Wells Fargo created dummy accounts just to boost their account numbers.
Right.
And so, and here I need to pause, Elise, because measurable goals are great. They're actually incredibly helpful, useful, motivating. You need them to run a business, and it helps to lead organizations to use measurable goals. But to your point about counterintuitive findings, goal-induced blindness is greatly underrated. At least just to illustrate for our listeners and viewers. This is a question I asked a group of students 3 weeks ago. And I'm going to ask you, I know what you're going to answer because you studied positive psychology, but just rhetorically, I'm going to ask you the same question, and our listeners can think about what their answer would be. And this is about goal-induced blindness. I was in front of 1,000 money management students, finance students, and I offered them, I said, if I show you a jar of gummies, and there's 100 gummies, 4 of them are going to kill you because they're poisoned. What would it take for me to convince you to have one of those gummies, to eat it? And I started by offering $1 million, and I went all the way to $1 billion. And those were students in their 20s. And what shocked me was that maybe 15% of the room had their hand up at $1 million.
Wow.
That is goal-induced blindness. And there's a reason why I picked 4 gummies out of 100, because in the psychology research, Mount Everest deaths are used as the prime example of goal-induced blindness.
Yeah.
And at least if you want to climb Everest, statistically, based on the historical data, you have 4% chance of dying in the process. Those are extreme examples of goal-induced blindness. But if you don't take time to think long-term, to think in the frame of positive psychology, you're going to chase money. 81% of millennials, when asked, say they want to be rich. That's their goal. It's not a bad goal, by the way. Go ahead. Follow that goal. But there's nuance that matters. and that's goal-induced blindness.
Mm-hmm. Completely aligned with that, dear friend, already my new friend. Let's talk a little bit. You mentioned the PERMA model, that the R is for relationships, prioritizing relationships in leadership. And I really, of course, completely echo the idea of, in so doing, that you give ongoing, honest feedback to the people, such that annual reviews or even semi-annual reviews become completely redundant and irrelevant. So can you talk a little bit more about why this is so important, especially when it relates to leadership through the lens of positive psychology?
Look, we know from the Harvard study that relationships are the number one factor that explains people's ability to thrive over long periods of time. Being a positive psychology expert, I'm sure you've followed the Harvard study. I love it because there's no study like it. They've studied people over 80 years, 8 decades. They've had multiple generations of researchers. They constantly ask people throughout their lifetime, how are you doing? Here's a questionnaire for you to fill. And then they tried to do statistical analysis. Are the people that are making more money, that are climbing the social ladder, that are healthy, happier than those that are losing their jobs, that are sick, that are maybe going to jail? And there's no relationship. There's no connection to self-reported happiness scores. And the one factor that surfaced is the quality of one's relationship in one's life. We talk about meaning at work and engagement at work. If you have a bad day at work, I'm going to bet that 8 out of 10 times it's a relationship issue.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why relationships are important. Relationships mean collaboration. Companies are put together, or teams are put together to create a sum of the parts that's bigger than individual efforts. So it's crucial. To your question on the feedback, athletes love feedback. If we go back to sports psychology, they want a coach who tells them, okay, a tennis player, change your swing, do this. They love the live feedback. But somehow when it comes to work, we all hate it. I was the same myself. But why is that? There's no real reason why we should.
Because of how badly it's given, usually.
Yes. And Dr. Rock, who's a neuroscientist, Dr. David Rock, has done research on how to improve feedback. So part of it, Elise, is, as you said, give it frequently enough on a live basis such that the year-end review becomes almost useless. Not useless because there's no feedback, but useless because the feedback is known. But also the trick, and this is from neuroscience, to improve the feedback process is to ask for it.
Yes,
And
right.
What Dr. David Rock found is, and they had people wired to these machines and trying to measure their stress response, their heartbeat, whether they were sweating in the feedback process. And they just made this tweak, ask for the feedback, and that reduced the stress, at least not just of the person receiving the feedback. It reduced the stress of the person giving the feedback.
I totally understand.
Because guess what? I'm a people manager, been a people manager for 25 years. It's stressful to me to give feedback because I don't know how you're going to react, and I care about our relationship.
Yes.
So if you go around at work and just flip that, and as a leader, you go and ask for feedback, and then people see you do it, then they do it. You change the culture, and the whole pressure around it goes down significantly.
I'm going to tell a story about how that I've used that across my life, but let's grab our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Sebastien Page. He's the head of the Global Multi-Asset and Chief Investment Officer at T. Rowe Price. We've been starting this conversation talking about positive psychology and how it can be used to improve individuals and management and leadership. After the break, we're going to start talking about how sports psychology can do the same. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. As I am dedicated to helping create a world where organizations thrive because their people thrive, are led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness, and we do business that betters the world, I keep researching and writing my own books. So one of my latest came out. It's called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I wrote it to help leaders understand what today's discerning workforce really wants to give their best and stick around. And then I provide 22 best practices to help you build that into your culture to give that to them. You can find my books on Amazon or my personal site, elisecortez.com. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Sebastien Page. He's the author of The Psychology of Leadership, Timeless Principles to Improve Your Management of Individuals, Teams, and Yourself. So the story really quick to illustrate the power of asking for feedback, which I know you will appreciate because you are originally from Canada and your first language is French. When I moved to Spain in my mid-20s, I had learned French in college and I learned that basically, but then I didn't know a whole lot about Spanish. So I just immediately, when I was out talking to people, I would say, me voy a hablar en español, would you just please correct me as I go? And the invitation of just saying, would you please correct me as I go? Just to your point, I could go on and be comfortable and confident because I've already asked for their feedback. And they could easily say, oh, hey, it's this tense, use this tense. And it was just easy, right? So to your point, both of us were enjoying the process. I rapidly improved how I could speak Spanish and then later Portuguese, and everybody's having a good time. So an illustration of how really soliciting the feedback is so much better for everything. And I love the idea of baking that into the culture.
Absolutely. And what you describe is a little bit like being coached in sports. And as I said earlier,
yeah, in the moment, yeah.
If athletes love feedback, and also the highest level athletes in pretty much any sport have coaches and they seek the feedback to get better, why don't we think about it the same way at work?
It's interesting you say that. Just quickly, Sebastien, I remember a time when, not that distance, maybe 10, 15 years ago, really, that I think people still thought of, she's got a coach. In other words, you're a problem child. There's something wrong with you. And now what we see is people recognize if you want to be really top of your game, you need a coach. And I always have at least two, by the way. So yeah, that whole idea of how we interact, how leaders and business people interact with coaches is, I think, gratefully, certainly turning the corner quite substantially.
And the new thing now in sports and beyond is sports psychologists. Mm-hmm. I have in The Psychology of Leadership the story of Felix Baumgartner. Most people don't remember this. It was over 10 years ago. He flew up in a balloon to the edge of space and skydived down.
Yes.
24 miles. He was free falling for 4 minutes. He was wearing a special suit. He was the first human being to break the sound barrier without being in an airplane. And what most people don't know is this whole thing, he was coached by a sports psychologist. Mm-hmm. And baseball teams, pro baseball teams, 80% of them report having a sports psychologist on staff. And I will guess that the remaining 20% are just not telling you. Yeah. And so there's coaching, there's mental coaching too.
Mm-hmm. No question. I had Dr. Nate Zinsser on my podcast some time ago, and he's great. You know him. He's amazing. So he's got a whole book out on confidence, and he coaches elite athletes and Olympic athletes. And of course, being stationed at West Point, people that are planning to go into the leadership ranks within the Army. If you need just a little bit of confidence to do any of those kinds of roles. So yeah, this is really becoming quite nuanced, which of course I love. Now, you open the show, Sebastien, talking about stress, and certainly part of what we're learning is there are ways to be able to start to reduce our stress or how we experience it through psychology and sports psychology in particular. And I think it's interesting, and I certainly align. You suggest that high performance isn't about avoiding stress, but knowing how to optimize it. Completely agree, and say more.
Well, to me, actually, it was a big realization because I was going about my high pressure job, always trying to feel less stressed and beating myself up. I should be a cool, calm, and collected executive. I've been doing this for 20 years. Yes, it's a stressful job, but I need to bring my stress down, 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 down. And talking with a sports psychologist kind of changed my thinking on this. This might be one of the biggest findings for me in terms of self-improvement in the psychology of leadership. I would summarize it this way, Elise. Optimal performance does not happen at a zero stress level. Another way to think about it is stress can increase performance up to a point, after which you choke, you burn out, it's bad for your health. But there's a curve. And the research behind this goes back decades and it's absolutely fascinating, a little bit quirky. The research started on Japanese dancing mice. At least I won't go into the scientific research of how this started. It's in the psychology of leadership, but I will say this, you can draw a curve that maps performance to your stress level. Now, if you're a sports psychologist, you're probably cringing right now because sports psychologists are careful with how they define stress. They reframe it with terms such as arousal in the literature or activation. And part of handling stress is reframing it. So I'm using stress as a broad term here, deviating a bit from the scientific literature. Here's the fascinating part of those curves. They're called Yerkes-Dodson's curves.
Yeah.
They're different for different tasks. So if you go to sports, if you want to do powerlifting or sprinting, you're going to reach peak performance at a very high activation or stress level. You want your adrenaline to be through the roof to do a 100-meter dash or to try a powerlifting task. If you're going to take a math test, or if you're going to do archery, you actually are going to perform optimally, not at zero stress. You got to care about it, prepare for it, and get activated for it.
Yeah.
But your peak of your curve for that task is going to be at a lower stress level. So imagine now you run a business and you have a team and you want to think about optimal team performance. Well, it's the same thing. We have tasks that are simple, straightforward, where you can put a very aggressive metric. We're digging a ditch today, everybody. Grab a shovel. Let's go. Let's be done in 2 hours. Other tasks, like research and development, will be optimized at a lower amount of pressure. I'm not going to go to my research and development team and scream at them, innovate by tomorrow. It's unproductive. So, but to me, it's just so important to realize that. Tim Ferriss, who's a great author, has said, I like to quote him, embracing stress is a superpower if you can reach that optimal point. And here's one more thing, Elise, about those curves. They're different for different people.
Yeah.
And so you have to learn yourself where you can optimize your performance. And also, you can work on them. You can work on them. You can increase your stress tolerance. At least I talk about Neil Armstrong in the book.
Yeah.
Neil Armstrong was just remarkable. Everyone knows about the moon landing.
Right.
It famously went horribly wrong. The module basically ran out of fuel. They lost connection with Earth. They veered off course, and the computer wasn't working. Armstrong took control of the module and landed it in a different spot than they were supposed to, but handled it. And the rest is part of human history. He famously said, it's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. The tidbit behind that story is, as an astronaut, he was hooked to a heart rate monitor. And for most of the mission, Elise, can you guess what his heart rate was?
Well, let's see. That was a difficult task. So 188.
So that would be very high stress, full adrenaline, 188, or full physical effort for a lot of people. I can't even get mine to 188. His heart rate for most of the mission was 75, which is
Wow. That was, I'm
basically
talking blood pressure, I guess. Yeah.
basically for most people, there's some effect with space, but for most people, it's a resting heart rate. It did go to 150 when he landed. But
Okay.
here's someone who can handle high pressure situations, who has built a stress tolerance. How did he do that? Repetition. Repetition is huge. Repetition and exposure. He was a jet fighter pilot in the war, and also
I didn't know that.
and also he was just wired that way. But you can learn to move your own stress curve, which I find fascinating. And you mentioned Dr. Nate Zinsser. His book is about that: visualization, building your own confidence, having a mantra, and so on.
Yeah. Oh, this is so yummy. I knew we were going to have a great conversation, Sebastien. There's so much I can extract out of you. Okay, so for just this last bit on sports psychology, I would be remiss if I didn't get you to talk about one of the other things that, that are counterintuitive that you suggest we do address, and that is thinking about death and working backward from your goal. We don't usually talk about death in this society.
It sounds morbid, but it goes back to Stoicism, which is more philosophy than psychology. And the original title for my manuscript was The End in Mind. And it was a nod to Stephen Covey, who wrote the most popular self-help, self-improvement book of all time, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People.
Right.
One of the habits was begin with the end in mind. Think very long term. What Covey was saying was, by doing that, you can figure out what your values are, what you want to be as a person, what you want to achieve in your lifetime. What do you want to reflect on your deathbed? And that guides your values, and then you bring it back to the present, and it helps you make decisions. So that's awesome. And that's part of what I talk about in the psychology of leadership. But the other thing too is that when you set a long-term goal, anything becomes possible because you have the benefit of time. And it just changes your perspective. And to me and to the Stoics and to most people, when you take time to think about this, thinking about the fact that, hey, we're all going to die one day. I have this ring on my finger that has a little sign. It says memento mori, which means remember you must die. It actually is very soothing.
Right? I understand.
What does it matter that I stub my toe on the side of the bed right now if, this is all cosmically a very long-term experiment, and, we're all going to die one day. So there's a way to reframe your thinking around this, thinking long-term, working backwards from there, building resilience around it, and helping these long-term perspectives guide your values and day-to-day decisions.
I love that you wear that ring, Sebastien, as a meaning and purpose woman. So, purpose works in part because we are mortal beings and we don't know when we're going to hit the exit ramp. And so the older we get, for often, especially I can put myself in this camp, the more fixated we can get on the things that we want to make happen in our lives, because we know that we don't get forever. And it gives us tremendous clarity, tremendous focus, tremendous energy and motivation. So I'm with you on embracing this death thing.
I guess we're taking for some of our listeners, a morbid turn, but it's really a different frame of mind. And I find it a positive thing.
It is. It certainly is positive for me. Let's let our listeners and viewers reflect on that for just a moment and see where they can find the positive piece of that. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We're on the air with Sebastien Page, the head of Global Multi-Asset and Chief Investment Officer at T. Rowe Price. We've been talking a bit about how we can use sports psychology to improve our own experience of life and also our effectiveness at leadership. After the break, we're going to talk about how we can do that with personality psychology. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. I mentioned in the last break that one of my books came out, The Great Revitalization. What I did for you is I created a very simple 3-page assessment that's on my website, gusto-now.com, that you can download, and it will help you understand the extent to which your current culture is meeting the needs of today's discerning workforce. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Sebastien Page, the author of The Psychology of Leadership, Timeless Principles to Improve Your Management of Individuals, Teams, and Yourself. So for this last section here, of course, I am, as I mentioned already very steeped in personality psychology. But let's start with the simple aspect of, you talk about, the big 5 personality theory. For those people who have not been exposed to that, if you could just quickly introduce the 5 elements of that.
Absolutely. And I'll do a little bit more. I'll tell you where I stand on each of these traits. And if you're game, Elise, not to put you on the spot.
I'm in.
As well. So the first one is openness to experience. If you score high on this trait, you like to try new things. You're the person who never wants to go to the same restaurant twice, and you like novelty. You get bored easily. If you're low in openness to experience, you're comfortable with routine, repetitive. I eat the same salad every day. So for lunch, I'm probably on the lower side in openness to experience. Elise?
I'm on the very high side.
Awesome. So maybe your listeners going to get to know you a little bit more today. I actually have my score results in the third part of the book in more details. The second trait is,
I appreciate. By the way, I want to celebrate that you did that, because I think it's authentic, it's open, it's honest, and it lets us into your world. I really like that you did that.
Thank you. Second trait is conscientiousness. So if you're neat, organized, on time, you score high in conscientiousness. If you're creative, a little bit loose with your deadlines, you're comfortable with incomplete solutions, which, by the way, is a great thing to do in business sometimes, because you don't have time to analyze everything. It's very different from academia in that way. So I scored, in the book, you'll see, very high in conscientiousness. What about you, Elise?
Middle of the road.
Middle. And by the way, as we're saying this, I think it's important to use the usual disclaimer. Only about 40% of your personality traits are inherited or genetically linked. And so they can change based on the situation. They can change over time. You can even change your personality if you want to work on it. That's, I think, an important disclaimer. But the traits just generally describe how you behave in most situations. Extroversion, we all know, right? If you're an extrovert, you get energy from going to social events, and you like being around people. You tend to like to speak up. And introverts would be the other side of that scale. I'm actually in the middle here. And in most situations, I'm on the introverted side. What about you?
Just the opposite. I'm also an ambivert and set more in the middle, but more just slightly skewed to the extroverted side. And one other thing to add that I think a lot of listeners and viewers don't know about personal psychology for the introversion extroversion realm is another part of that is how you handle sensation and what's the word I'm looking for?
Stimulation.
How you handle stimulation. So introverts can be really, really wigged out by a lot of stimulation, and extroverts can handle a lot of stimulation. And that's I think a really important distinction that doesn't usually get surfaced when we talk about introversion and extroversion.
Good point. The next one is interesting, is agreeableness. So if you're high in agreeableness, you tend to be maybe a people pleaser. You like to agree with people, uncomfortable being the devil's advocate. And then the opposite would be being low in agreeableness, would be being more disagreeable. By the way, in the psychology of leadership, I kind of made it up based on what we know about the celebrities. I put celebrities on both sides. So that gives you an
I like
idea.
that, actually. Yeah.
But for me, for agreeableness, this one, and I was very vulnerable and transparent in the book, I scored low in agreeableness, and at least I disagreed with the results, of course.
Of course
That's
you did.
a bit
Of
of a
course you did.
paradox. But actually, I ended up taking another test to double check. And I've had to come around to the idea that I score somewhat low in agreeableness.
Mhm.
I've had a life that I would describe that involving research and intellectual debates. And maybe after 20 years of doing that, you develop traits where you're comfortable in a
Mhm.
respectful, trustful way, but disagreeing with people, and kind of you build a reflex. In academia, that's kind of the case for a lot of people. So, putting you on the spot again, Elise.
Well, what's interesting is it's evolved a bit over time as I've grown as a person. It used to be much higher, my agreeableness. Now it's more like, in like the 85 or so sort of realm. And so I have learned, and I like how you put forth the idea that just some disagreeableness is essential to be an effective leader. And that's come as I've, been more discerning in my thought leadership, and where do I agree with this and where do I disagree with that. So it is definitely evolved, but today it's about 85%.
So we're different in that way. And then neuroticism is, do you tend to get nervous, anxious, especially anticipating the future? I score high. I think it's part of how I perform. And that's why I studied the implications of stress from sports psychology and business and life. So I have to admit, I score fairly high.
And I'm also pretty low on that one as well. And I understand, and I like how, and so I want to get through as many as we can, because once again, in this part of your book, you're turning some standard sort of accepted ideas on their heads. And that's one of them, is to be able, when does it make sense to lean into our neuroticism? So, and worry a little bit. Okay. So let's take as many as we can here. I got to start with the introversion, extroversion thing. And I really have found this in my own work, Sebastien, where you talk about, of course, reading the room and to call on the introverts, because this is really about getting the best out of everybody. And it's not the most extroverted person that has the best ideas per se. And I love Susan Cain's book on introversion. I read it as well. So let's talk a little bit about why it's so important to call on the introverts and how we can do so effectively.
Introverts tend to be quite thoughtful about what they want to contribute. In practice, when I call on someone who's more introverted, who's been more quiet in the meeting, I get the best insight.
Absolutely right. Spot on.
Because talk about counterintuitive findings, introverts make good leaders. And most of my career, I thought, to be a good leader, you need to be a good communicator.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, that's true. But as you climb the ladder, listening becomes the skill you need as a leader.
Right.
Way more important than your quality of your communication style. It's listening that makes you a better leader. Very counterintuitive for a lot of leaders. And this is what introverts get right. So, Elise, what does it mean in practice? In a meeting, I talk about the pivot method in the psychology of leadership, and I use it in my own leadership meetings. When an extrovert is dominating the conversation, there's a polite way to interrupt them. Because if you don't, by the way, and if you're too agreeable and you can't interrupt, the rest of the room is not going to be happy with you at the leader.
That's right.
So the polite way is you interrupt, but you then reflect back what they were saying. So, Paul, you were saying XYZ. So you're showing the room that what they were talking about is important. You're showing them that you were paying attention to what they were talking about. And that takes a lot of the tension out of the interruption. Then you turn to the introvert and say, Mary, you've been listening. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
And this pivot by reflecting first on what the extrovert was talking about is really helpful. The other one is 1 over n. At least n is the number of people in the meeting. We are having a meeting now. There's 2 of us. 1 over 2 means 50%, means each of us should, this is a different format. I'm talking more today because it's an interview. But
Right.
in a meeting, you would say we should each contribute 50%. If there's 10 people, n equals 10, 1 over 10, everybody should contribute equally 10%. I often remind my team, we're going to seek to go towards 1 over n. If you're too quiet, you got to contribute more. If you're dominating the airtime, you got to contribute a little bit less.
Yeah, I found gold, and there's just such, and I've learned so much about how to engage introverts in a to make it safe for them, and so then when they're ready to engage, so important. Okay, we're close to being out of time here, so let's talk about something that we haven't actually hit already in your introduction of the ocean here. Let's talk about, just for grins and giggles, how can we cultivate the positive side of conscientiousness, eating our vegetables and having good habits?
Habits is the answer.
Mm-hmm.
As I said earlier, you can change your personality. You can become more conscientious.
Mm-hmm.
Go back to James Clear bestseller Atomic Habits or Charles Duhigg's research. Small habits, when done consistently over time, amount to giant results, meaningful results. At least you publish books. That's the best example. You don't sit down and write a book. It's small writing habit that over time amounts to something awesome. That is the key to becoming more conscientious. And the research behind it, especially from Charles Duhigg, you need a cue, then the habit, and then a reward. And the reward can be anything. So for me, for writing, the cue was basically it's Saturday morning, I need to write. That's the cue. I have a schedule. Right. Yep. That's my cue. Mm-hmm. And the habit was writing. And then the reward, very simply, I'd go to a spreadsheet and write the number of words I wrote. And to me, it was satisfying to see those numbers line up and add up. Mm-hmm. Cue, habit, reward. Small habits lead to big results if applied consistently over time. And by the way, bad habits, very bad results if you keep them up over time. Smoking every day will lead to a pretty bad result over time, likely lung cancer.
Right.
You want to observe your habits and tweak them up and down, good and bad.
I like very much how you talk about keeping track of what you did as well. So you can actually really see the progress over time. I think that's an essential part of what you're talking about here to cultivate conscientiousness. So we did it, Sebastien. It goes by so very fast. You know that this show is listened to by people around the world who are tuning in for various reasons. Sometimes they're tuning in to get specific subject matter expertise from the guest. Oftentimes it's about becoming a better leader themselves or to becoming a better business leader. What would you like to leave them with today?
Think long-term, embrace stress up to an optimal point, and enjoy the ride.
Fantastic way to finish. Sebastien, I'm delighted to know you. And thank you for making yourself even more conscientious to get this book out into the world and then getting out and about and having conversation with people like me so we know about it. It's a delight to know you.
Thank you, Elise. This was a lot of fun.
Listeners and viewers, you are going to want to learn more about Sebastien Page, the work that he does at T. Rowe Price, his various articles on finance or leadership, and his books, including the latest one, The Psychology of Leadership. You can start by visiting his website, psychologyofleadership.net. He is also on LinkedIn. Last week, we were on the air with Christopher and Christopher Wong Michelson and Jennifer Tosti Karas talking about their new book, The Meaning and Purpose of Work, an interdisciplinary framework for considering what work is for. We three researchers got to chew deeply on the meaning of work, including one model which puts forth most of us relate to a job as our work as either a job, a career, or a calling, each with pros and cons. If you're interested in meaning, this is one you don't want to miss. Next week, we'll be on the air with Brian Cunningham, who began his career as a parking lot attendant and rose to CEO, talking about his work and book, Leadership, the Universal Principles, which at its core begins with your awareness and its relationship to what he calls your awareness quotient as the foundation for your leadership journey. We'll go on to discuss how to apply this practical understanding to your journey through the developmental progression of your service as a leader. See you then. Remember that work is one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave, and can give us the opportunity to do business in a way that betters the world. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.